Hi, welcome back to Basement Bible Breakdown. My name is Stephen Whitsitt. Glad we can have this time together and appreciate you listening and subscribing to my channel. Today I'm going to be dealing with some more of Jason and his IO doctrine. And he was not exactly kindest in his answering back in my last video that I talked and refuted his positions, and he offered up another one, a very scathing report and very demonstrative in his approach in answering me, which I found quite childish. But he asked several questions and presented several things, and so I am here going to attempt to answer some of those things directly without the extra banter and name calling that he engaged in. And then in his videos, of course, he listed and talked about a lot of different things. And so many of those things I'm not going to address, I can't address, and just a little bit too much more to deal with some pretty ignorant arguments. And what do I mean by ignorant? Well, let me bring something up here for you. Jason and Don Preston and everything else engage in a way of arguing and argumentation that is just best demonstrated by this little saying. If I was to ask you, why are fire engines red? And you were asked me that question, I'd give you here an answer. See, there's 12 inches in a ruler. A ruler is like Queen Elizabeth, and she's in England, and England is next to the sea, and you know, there are fish in the sea, and fish have fins, and fins live next to Finland, or in Finland, and next to Finland, of course, is Russia, and Russians are red. So anytime that fire engines are rushing here and there, they're red, right? So that is why they're red. You get the kind of thought process that goes on there, the correlation of putting things together that take words out of context and then associating with another verse that is not of the same context, but yet they try to develop the same meaning from that. So that is the problem with the whole hermeneutic from preterists right from the beginning. Now, to answer a couple of things he said, as far as us futurists and our denominations, nobody agrees on anything, and that is just absolutely insane to suggest. And the ignorance, of course, is that all futurist Protestant churches and even Catholic churches also hold to the Nicene Creed as being the essentials of what the Christian faith is. So when we look at that, that defines what Christianity has been teaching and taught and is about, that gospel message now for 2,000 years. So we all agree on those things. The things that we differ on, of course, are non-essentials and the small stuff. I will talk about that later. Now, he also said, I'm not going to engage preterists, but yet he did. So I must have got under skin. And then I didn't answer him right away in the way that he thought. So he says, you know, he's nowhere to be found. He's gone. He can't answer my things. But in reality, I just have to take a little bit of time to actually deal with what he said, because it was such a convoluted mess. It was just like hard to decipher what he was saying and trying to get out what he really believes and stuff. And of course, that all centers around the idea of defining Gentiles, Jews, Israelites, and all of that. And so we'll deal with that in just a moment. But somebody commented on there, and Lorraine Raymond, if I got to pronounce her name correctly, she said, I would have more respect for these guys if they would address your questions and or statements like real grown-ups. But that would mean they would have to lose face and would have to grow up. I find it simply ridiculous that somebody who calls names bozos, idiot, moron, and goes through that whole litany of names and gets personal that way is not considered a child. When adults talk to each other, they should not have to sit there and in a conversation and continue to call somebody a bozo. In other words, if we were face-to-face and Jason was face-to-face with me, he would never sit there and continue to call me a bozo or anybody else those kind of names in front of him, because the chances are you might get hit. We don't call people names in front of each other and belittle them in that such of a way. But then yet, of course, he thinks he has the freedom and the permission on Facebook to do that. All right, now, what I want to do here is play a little clip of his response back to me and respond to that. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to see this is a convoluted mess that he presents. And it really took me a lot of time to try to iron out what he was trying to say in saying this. But listen up.
Then he went on to say, but he's wrong because there's still Gentiles coming in today. Look, there are no Gentiles coming in today because a Gentile was a non-Jew, okay? There is no Jews today. There are no biblical Jews today. You cannot observe the laws of Yahweh without a temple, without sacrifices, without the law system. And as we know, like Jesus said, every jot and tittle of that law system would pass away when heaven and earth passed away.
Okay, so what he's doing here, he is equating the fact that in order to be called a Jew, you have to be following the law. You have to have the temple, you have to have the temple worship and everything else. So those are what Jews were called, and it had nothing to do with their lineage, which is the silly part, because a Jew is actually, and I can look it up, you can look it up in Wikipedia. The English term Jew originates in the biblical Hebrew word Yehudi, which means the kingdom of Judah. So they called them Jew. Now, where does this all come from? And he says, I never addressed this point before. Okay, so I will do it right here, right now. During the Old Testament, of course, the nations divided. Israel, that kingdom, all was one, divided up into two branches. The northern tribe of the 10 became known as Israel, and the southern part became known as Judah, which later, of course, that term for Judah became Jew. The shortened abbreviation means people who came from Judah. So the 10 lost tribes of Israel were part of the original 12 Hebrew tribes, of course. And he asked the question there, so what's the difference between Israel and Judah? Israel had a single kingdom during the reign of Solomon and David, and that southern reign came to be called Judah, which is consistent with the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. All the other 10 were Israel. Now, when they were all together, did Judah, which included Jerusalem, was where the temple was, the Jews practiced the law. Did the northern 10 tribes also practice and keep the law? Yes, not perfectly. There was plenty of bouts of rebellion during those years, but they did have their own synagogues. They did worship, and they were at very much times law-abiding, in the same sense that Judah also went through periods where they were not a law-abiding, but at times they were. But the fact is that whether you are Jew from Judah or Israel, you were still descendant of Abraham. That is the key fact. Jews were always descendants of Israel. All right, let's go back to his video here.
In that generation and before some of them died, which is what he predicted on the Mount of Olives. Every stone would be turned over. Okay, the temple would go bye-bye. All right? So you cannot have Gentiles today because a Gentile was a designation in the New Testament of people who were non-law observant.
All right, get that. So Gentiles was a designation for people who were not non-Jews. Means they were Israelites, but they were not practicing or not law-abiding, which means then, according to his definitions, the Gentiles were given the law, but they are no longer abiding by the law that they were given. So they are still descendants of Israel.
Okay, they were non-Jews. All right, and
so non-Jews, of course, are people who are not following the law. Jews are the ones who are following the law.
You notice that Whitsett just absolutely, utterly botches that whole concept, right? He says, so he goes to his Greek dictionary, and he reads, and he starts to totally botch the word Gentile and the word Jew. So the term Jew didn't even come to exist until centuries after Israel came to be. Israel is the chosen people of God, not the Jew. Okay?
See, now, you see that. He says the Jew is not the chosen people, the Israelites. But he is not remembering and not taking into account that the 12 tribes divided. Jews are the name for the people that came from Judah. The 10 lost tribes are the northern ones. There's the ones that were scattered to the other nations. Now, after Babylon, and when they came back, the people resettled in that area of Judah and rebuilt Jerusalem. They were the ones who were being called Jews. And that's where that name Jew kind of stuck from, and that's where it came from, was after that. So they rebuilt the temple. The Herodian temple was built there in Jerusalem again. Now, it also says in there that those there was remnants of those other 10 tribes that came and became part of Judah. They still existed. That's why James in James 1 can say, unto the 12 tribes, because there is no 10 lost tribes. There remain part of Judah still, all 12 tribes, and they remained in the land.
Okay, the Jew was a name that was given roughly around the split of the kingdoms. Okay.
As I said, Jews was the name given at the time of the split.
Israel obviously came centuries prior, and the descendants of Abraham and Israel came way before the term Jew ever came to be. So he just doesn't understand it.
Yes, I do understand it. Israelites, 12 tribes. Jews are from Judah, of the 2 tribes, the 10 that split north. So, yes, I do very much get that.
He says, what does he say here? I didn't write down exactly what he said in terms of that, but if you listen to his audio, you can tell that he really doesn't get it, right? He's using the word Jew to refer to all descendants of Abraham.
And I am correct in that, because Jews were called Jews because they were part of the southern tribes. They were not part of the 10 tribes. They were part of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah. That is what those Jews, and that's where that name comes from.
Which is stupid. It's so stupid. Because
I'm stupid.
First of all, even at the split, the Samaritans of the northern kingdom didn't consider themselves Jews. All right, but
right,
were they
didn't.
Descendants of Abraham? Yeah, they sure were.
They were descendants. See that? They were descendants of Israel, but they did not call themselves Jews. Why? They didn't call themselves Jews because they were not from Judah. They weren't from the tribe of Judah. They weren't from the Benjamin. The land itself, now that was divided from the southern kingdom from the north, the southern kingdom was known as Judah.
Garbage truck that's about to plow into people here. I don't know what he's doing.
And obviously he's doing this off his cuff as he's driving, so he's talking about a garbage truck here.
So anyways, he basically equates all descendants of Abraham to the term Jew, and that's ridiculous.
Okay, when we come into the New Testament, the 10 tribes were, of course, scattered all over the place. And so you have Judah and those people being called Jews. Paul is being called a Jew. All the way through Scripture, the term of Jews continues. The Jews that were in Jerusalem, the Jews, they continued to exist. And it was, the word eventually and essentially became the word used for anybody who was a descendant of Israel. That's what the name came to represent in the New Testament. So anybody who was a descendant of Israel was a Jew in the New Testament.
Let's get this straight, folks. A Gentile was a non-Jew. All right. So if you were if you were an Israelite who was not practicing Judaism, you were not a Jew.
Here's the confusion, of course. So if you were a Gentile from the northern tribe and you're not practicing, you were a non-Jew. Because Jews practiced the law, non-Jews did not. They were not abiding by the law. But that does not mean that they were never given the law.
Okay, but does that change your status as an Israelite? Of course it doesn't. But to a Jew, anyone who was not observing the law was a Gentile.
And that's incorrect. See, he's deciding that because these people were not law-abiding, therefore they are called Gentiles. Now, remember this point, because I'm going to bring it up again, probably in the next video. I want to finish this up here, and so yeah, I think there'll be about 3 or 4 parts instead of going on for 20 minutes.
I think it's John 7 or John 8, I can't remember, but you know the passage where Jesus is talking to the Jews, and he tells them that where he's going, they cannot come, and blah, blah, blah.
See, he even said it in the New Testament, calling to the Jews.
Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Gentiles and teach them? So the Jews knew that the dispersed ones were among the Gentiles. And the Jews would have equated those dispersed ones with the Gentiles. Because to a Jew, if you were not observing the law, and if you were not worshiping in Jerusalem, okay, you were a Gentile.
Okay, and that's absolutely false. And I'll prove that a little bit later on. But the idea was, is he's saying you can only be a Jew if you were worshiping in Jerusalem. And then any of the descendants of Abraham who are not law-abiding, who are not worshiping in Jerusalem, are Gentiles. That's how he's defining the word. They are still descendants of Israel, but they were not practicing the law. You've got to remember this distinction.
You weren't considered a Jew. All right, and you can do all the research you want on this. The funny thing is, if you actually look up, like in the Septuagint, if you look up the word goyim.
Okay, he brings up the word goyim now, and he's going to prove.
You'll see that one of the definitions
is
of Abraham.
Descendant of Abraham.
Because even...
And here's the silliness of him trying to bring that up. The word goyim, which means nation. Israel was a nation of people. The Egyptians were a nation. So, of course, you're going to use the word nation of Israel. There's the distinction. If I'm saying nation of Israel, I'm not talking about the nation of Egypt. I'm talking about the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. And, of course, in the Old Testament, yes, Israel was all one, but when it divided, it became two nations, but still it came from one family line.
The Bible, even the translators recognize that that term is often used for descendants of Abraham, Israelites. All right, but of course he didn't mention that. He only mentioned the definitions that work or help him. So he's very confused. He thinks that all descendants of Abraham were Jews, but that's...
And that is absolutely true. All the descendants of Abraham were called Jews in the New Testament. They lumped it all together. Anybody who was part of any of that tribe. So if you look at it and you pay attention, he says all 12 tribes, and then later on he calls them Jews. Even Paul, when he was just addressing Jews and Gentiles in Romans, he, I can't remember what tribe he was from, but Benjamin and Judah, that was the northern one. Those are the ones that called. So you're going to sit there and tell me that the other 10 tribes were not also called Jews in the New Testament? That's what's wrong. By the time we get there, they're both, all 12 tribes are being called Jews.
It's not the truth at all. All right? Again, if you were not observing Judaism, you were a Gentile. Okay? And that could be an Italian, that could be a Greek, that could be a Hebrew. You notice that Whitsett never mentions any of the facts that come from the start of this story where the Israelites were scattered out into the nations. Did you realize that? You notice that he doesn't mention when Moses is outlining to the children of Israel in the beginning that if they disobeyed his law and didn't abide by the commandments that he was setting before them.
Okay, I think that's enough for now. But you understand the point here is that he conflates the idea of what actually Gentiles are. So in my next video, I'm going to deal with that and address that further. So thank you for watching. Keep watching, and tell your friends if they're talking about preterism or dispensationalism and want some clarification on points and everything else. I hope I'm able to do that for you here with these videos. We'll see you again. Thank you very much. And yes, stick around for part 2.